Tom came closer and introduced the man beside him.
Mr. Walker, this is my eldest daughter, Natalie.
James Walker looked at her. With his hands behind his back, he laughed until wrinkles appeared at the corners of his eyes.
Mr. Davidson, you are so lucky. Both of your daughters are beautiful. I'm envious. You're too kind.
On the other side of the room, Cheryl overheard Mr. Walker and quickly pulled Nick aside. I'm not as beautiful as Natalie. I know I can't be compared to her. Natalie looked at her father's expression, which was now as calm as a spring breeze, and got a bad feeling in her stomach. She could tell that he was up to no good.
I only have 2 daughters.
Tom coughed.
Now that my youngest has found happiness, it's time to worry about her sister's future.
He turned and nodded to Natalie.
Natalie, talk to Mr. Walker, please.
His fatherly expression made her feel nauseous. She finally understood why he had made her come back. It was because he wanted to introduce her to this man, this fat, greasy man who he obviously was trying to reel in. Seeing him in the same room as Nick made him look even worse. Until now, she had still had a sliver of hope that Tom might have called her back because he wanted to make up for what he had done to her. But now it seemed that was just wishful thinking. Tom had never felt that he owed her anything, and he had obviously never felt ashamed. Just then, a tall, powerful figure stepped into the hall and quickly became the focus of everyone's attention. But Natalie was still immersed in her own world and did not notice. Sorry, I don't think I have anything to talk about with Mr. Walker, she smiled coldly. I came to the party just like I said I would. If there's nothing else, then I'll be leaving. As she spoke, she put down the cup in her hand and got up to leave. Natalie! Cheryl let go of Nick's hand and came over to her father, pretending to be friendly. She reached out and grabbed Natalie's wrist. Don't be angry. Daddy did this for your own good. All these years, he's been worrying about your future. She almost managed to squeeze a tear from the corner of her eye. Mr. Walker is the head of the Walker Group, and he is also a real estate tycoon. If you stay with him, you'll definitely live a life of luxury and ease. She said a lot of things, but Natalie remained unmoved. She raised her hand to shake off her sister's words with a frown. You make him sound like a catch. Why don't you marry him? What are you saying? Cheryl immediately bit her lip. I already have Nick. How could I marry anyone else?
Natalie,
Tom snapped when he heard. How can you say that? Her stepmother, Rosemary, had come over and was frowning as well. With an expression filled with heartache, she said, Cheryl respects you so much, and you speak to her like this. Respect? She felt like laughing. You use words like that to deceive ignorant people, not me. Don't expect me to play along with it. Don't insult me. They were so absorbed in their conversation that none of them noticed that behind them, a tall figure had raised his head and caught sight of her. Mr. Walker, you don't know the whole story. Natalie crossed her arms and turned to look at him. Although I am the eldest daughter of this family, I've been exiled abroad for 5 years. My status in this family is somewhere below the maids. You won't get even the slightest benefit from me. So you might as well choose my younger sister. She's been spoiled and doted on all her life, unlike me. I also have a child, and everyone in Seattle knows about it. If you marry me, you'll only be insulting yourself. Natalie's words were decisive because she didn't have as many scruples as Tom. Since she wanted to cut off this relationship, why not do it cleanly? The moment she finished speaking, everyone's expressions changed. Tom and Rosemary's faces were filled with fear and awkwardness from having their lies exposed. The gathered guests all started to feel sorry for Natalie. Huh, I didn't know they treated her like that. How could he do that? After all, she's his daughter, his own flesh and blood. As a father, how could he be so heartless?
Mr. Davidson.
Mr. Walker couldn't hold in his anger any longer. He looked at Tom and said with a forced smile,
You didn't tell me she had a child. How could I possibly lie to you, Mr. Walker?
Tom was so anxious that he wanted to explain, but the truth had already come out. No matter what he tried now, it would be useless. Natalie had sacrificed her reputation to hurt him even more. There was no way out of it. Just as his scalp started to burn from worry, He suddenly heard a cold sneer behind him.
When did the woman I've got my eye on become reduced to this? To being sold like a cheap toy?
Everyone turned their attention to the person who had spoken. They saw a man walking over with steady steps. There was a playful smile on his face, and his eyes stared at Natalie like she was his prey. Enemies are always easy to find. He hadn't expected to meet this woman here. When Natalie saw him, she was so shocked that her lips parted slightly, and she didn't know what to say. She hadn't thought that she would meet this man again so soon. It was fate. Tonight he was wearing a tailored suit that fitted him perfectly. His stature was tall and straight, and his entire body emitted an indescribable aura that filled those around him with awe. While everyone was whispering and trying to guess who he was, Mr. Walker's face changed dramatically. He rushed forward and shouted,
Mr. Claire, I never expected to meet you here.
Tom couldn't believe his ears. So this was Bryce Claire, the man who had control of the city's economy and who could shake up financial circles with the snap of his fingers. He hadn't expected him to be so young. Cheryl pulled Nick aside with an ugly expression on her face. She said in a low voice,
What's going on? Isn't that the man who picked Natalie up at the airport the other day?
As soon as she said it, as if trying to prove her right, Liam, who had been standing in the corner, excitedly ran over to Bryce and hugged his calves.
Daddy, you're here!
He shouted. Natalie was so embarrassed that she wanted to cover her face and run away. The argument in the car that day was still vivid in her mind. She didn't want to owe this man anything.
Daddy?
Tom felt like he had been struck by lightning when he heard this. He stood there in a daze, then turned around and asked Natalie,
Is he Bryce Claire's son?
She didn't know how to answer, so she just pursed her lips slightly and turned to look at Bryce. Bryce bent down without hesitation and hugged Liam. Then he caressed Natalie's face and laughed softly.
Didn't you say we would come here together? How come you left without waiting for me?
The fingers that touched her cheek burned like fire. Her face flushed red as she tried to turn away. For a moment, she was unable to say a word. Bryce didn't care about her reaction. He just glanced at Mr. Walker, who was no longer calm. He was frightened by the man's gaze and quickly apologized.
I didn't know Miss Davidson was with you. I'll leave.
Mr. Walker spoke quickly, and then without waiting for Tom to say anything, turned and left the hall. Tom could only stand there helpless. He railed against Natalie in his heart. How could she hide her relationship with Bryce from her family? He was about to say something, but Bryce interrupted him. Holding the child in one hand and Natalie's shoulder in the other, he said,
Come on, let's go sit over there for a while.
With that, he left Tom and took the other two with him. When they reached a quiet corner where nobody was paying attention to them, Natalie finally broke free from his arm. She retreated half a step and asked doubtfully, Why did you help me?
Of course I didn't want to help you,
Bryce sneered. He grabbed her wrist and whispered into her ear,
You're an ungrateful little thing. I'm here to get even.
When he spoke, he intentionally leaned in very close to her ear, his breathing heavy. She knew that he was talking about the $100 she had thrown at him, and she felt uncomfortable and backed away slightly. She hadn't expected this man to hold a grudge, so just helping her required him to settle the score. After a while, she reached for Liam and snatched him back. She pulled him away from Bryce and looked at him cautiously. Seeing her black eyes looking at the boy like she had to protect him, Bryce couldn't help but laugh. He leaned in again and whispered into her ear,
Don't be nervous. People I want never get away. Just be good and wait for me here.
After he said this, he turned and walked away, leaving her with the child in her arms and her heart beating erratically. Her cheeks burned. She hadn't felt like this in years.
Unlock the rest of the story only on Pocket FM app. Hurry now! Click the link in the description to download Pocket FM today.